أنا أنت. أخي شوف. يلا روح اشتري. 2 3 4 5 6 9 حقي 4 5.
Never charged with a crime, Mohammed Odaini spent almost 9 years imprisoned.
عندي شعور يعني مثلا أحس إنه سنين راحت من عمري ما استطعت مثلا إني أعوضها.
He is the last detainee from Guantanamo Bay prison to have returned home to live in Yemen.
I forgot a lot of people. I forgot it. Some people, when I left, he was a baby. When I be back, has married and has sons. Yeah.
I guess that tells you that you were gone for a long time.
The United States still holds 164 men captive at Guantanamo. About half of them are Yemeni. 56 have been cleared for release, but are waiting to go free. In this episode of Fault Lines, we've traveled to Yemen to ask what the consequences of America's policy of indefinite detention have been, and to find out what life is like here after Guantanamo.
ايش شكله كثير طيب جدا. تجلس
Mohammed was studying in Pakistan when the aftershocks of September 11th began reverberating around the world. One night in the spring of 2002, he was visiting a student house when Pakistani authorities raided it. He was arrested, along with more than a dozen others.
أخذوني وقالوا لي بس أنت محتجز عندنا. أنا أعرف إن ما عندكش حاجة بس كده بس لما نجمع معلومات فقط.
2 months later, the Pakistanis turned Mohammed over to American forces. Farouk Ali Ahmed had also traveled abroad to teach Quran.
مسكتنا الحكومة الباكستانية سلموا الأمريكان أخذونا قندهار. طبعا من غير الأذية اللي حصلناها نحن ما فيش نوم أذية كثيرة. بعدين سافروا إلى غوانتنامو.
What reason did the Pakistanis give for detaining you?
بدون سبب ما في سبب. فقط لأنه حصلوا أموال من الأمريكان على كل شخص. ما قدروا معي من المال.
Farouk spent 8 years at Guantanamo. Like Mohammed, he denies having been involved in attacks on U.S. targets or terrorism of any kind. Though they labeled him an enemy combatant and said he was associated with Al-Qaeda, the United States never charged him with anything either.
What sort of mistreatment did you experience while you were in Guantanamo?
التعذيب البدنية هذه، التسهير، التعيق ساعات طويلة، الجلوس في زنزانة صغيرة.
دائما يعذبوننا نفسيا في كل وقت، في الأكل، في المعاملة، في الشراب، وكذلك يعني تعذيب تعرض يعني في التحقيق مع مثل المحققين والربط وحاجات زي كذا يعني.
But as bad as the physical torture was, they say it was nothing compared to the torment of being wrongly imprisoned.
يعني كنت أشعر بخيبة أمل، كنت أشعر أنه قلبي يدعو عليهم ويلعنهم 24 ساعة. يعني كنت أفكر أنهم بيكرهوني أو عاملتهم ما عملت لهمش حاجة، يعني ليش كذا يعاملونا؟ يعني لو أفكر في الموضوع هذا ممكن واحد يفقد صوابه ولا يفقد عقله. فقدت الحرية أكثر حاجة، خاصة الصلاة في المسجد وأهلي أبي وأمي. اللهم إنا نسألك بأسمائك الحسنى وصفاتك العلى. فقدتهم.
دولة أنا عندي إسلام ودين ونحن نقر هذا الدين ونعتقد هذا الدين، يمكن خرجت من السجن منون، لكن بفضل الله عز وجل ثم هذا الدين بقت معي، عقلي بقى معي. اللهم أنبت الزرع وأجل الزرع يا أكرم الأكرمين.
They were captured by the Pakistanis, they were captured by members of the Northern Alliance, they were captured by maybe what we call Taliban today.
Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson was Secretary of State Colin Powell's Chief of Staff from 2002 to 2005.
They were turned over on bounty basis, usually, to the United States and whisked back to Guantanamo as if they were the hardened core, hardcore al-Qaeda operatives or Taliban leadership.
But it became increasingly clear that they were not.
If senior Bush administration officials knew many Guantanamo detainees hadn't committed crimes against the United States, why didn't they just send men like Farouk and Mohammed back home?
They weren't guilty of anything except having been in the wrong place at the wrong time.
We're heading to St. Michael's, Maryland, where former Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld keeps a summer home. We want some answers from one of the men who was key in setting up the prison at Guantanamo Bay.
To this day, only 7 of the 779 men the U.S. has held at Guantanamo have been tried and convicted by a military tribunal. The tribunal's chief prosecutor has said the government is unlikely to put more than about 20 on trial, less than 3% of those detained since the prison was open. Currently, there are 46 indefinite detainees who are considered too dangerous to release but impossible to try. An Obama administration task force has said either there isn't sufficient evidence against them or what evidence there is tainted.
Hi there, my name is Wab Kanu. I'm with Al Jazeera. Mr. Rumsfeld, I'd like to ask if I could speak to you for a minute for a documentary. We're doing a documentary on Guantanamo Bay prison.
No, you make an appointment with my office and see what...
We've tried to contact you through your office and they haven't gotten back to us. Mr. Rumsfeld, we'd like to know how you justify detaining many men in Guantanamo Bay who are innocent and who can't be tried in court.
You can't, you got some 740, 750 prisoners. You've told the American people they're hardcore al-Qaeda operatives. You can't then suddenly say, oh, made a mistake. These people are not really tough al-Qaeda operatives. Oh my God, we've got to reverse this. We got to close this camp. You can't do that. It's politically impossible.
We came to Yemen to see what kind of life awaits detainees after Guantanamo. However, no one has been transferred back here since 2010. The one exception is Adnan Latif. He came back in 2012 in a body bag. It took more than 3 months from the day Mohammed Latif heard the news his brother Adnan had been found dead in a cell until he was able to bury his body here. A military autopsy at Guantanamo determined he'd committed suicide. And by the time the US military delivered his body back to Yemen, it was too late for his family to have an independent examination performed.
فمن خلال هذا يعني هي كانت وسيلة لإخفاء جريمتهم وحتى لا نعلم ما هي وسيلة القتل.
Adnan had been cleared for release from Guantanamo 3 times before President Obama imposed a moratorium on returning detainees to Yemen. In 2010, a DC district court ordered that he be freed.
ونحن من خلال ما نرى في عينيه نرى في عينيه الأمل وهو يشعر أنه يعود ونرى البراءة ونرى الابتسامة صافية على وجهه ونرى حبه للناس.
An appeals court overturned the ruling.
هذا ولده عز الدين وأرسل بها إلى عز الدين وهو يخاطبه: عز الدين ملك في قلبي وتاج على رأسي.
Guantanamo doctors had diagnosed Adnan with bipolar and borderline personality disorders. The guards found his behavior extremely challenging and reported that he made statements asking to die.
He was expressing a message. Sure, he said that he wanted to commit suicide in his letters, that this place was driving him mad, that he was miserable. But it's not clear to me that he actually wanted to end his own life.
His lawyer and family questioned the conclusions of a 2012 U.S. military investigation that Adnan committed suicide by overdosing on 24 tablets of an antipsychotic drug he'd managed to hide from the guards.
They didn't even consider the possibility that someone gave Adnan these pills after he got to his cell.
يعني الحسبة غير ما كان يتوقع وغير ما كنا نتوقع. قتلوه ولا بد أن يقتلوا كما قتلوه.
Before Adnan died, the Obama administration had placed a moratorium on returning detainees to Yemen, even those it had cleared for release. Over the years, countries like Saudi Arabia, Afghanistan, and Pakistan have seen almost 90% of their Guantanamo detainees transferred, whether to prisons or to freedom. But so far, fewer than a fifth of Yemeni detainees have been returned.
These parade grounds were filled with thousands of spectators on National Unity Day in 2012 when a member of Al-Qaeda blew himself up right here. The blast killed some 100 Yemeni army officers and injured 200 more. Now, there's nothing to suggest a connection between the bomber and Guantanamo, but this highlights one of the fears the U.S. government has with returning detainees to this country, that after their return, they might carry out an attack like the one commemorated here, or even ones against American targets.
What we say to the Americans is that if they help Yemen as far as security issues are concerned, that they and our regional players also help in the rehabilitation of those who are released from Guantanamo, that Yemen is capable really of handling the issue.
Since 2009, the United States has used drone and missile strikes to target and kill what they say are Al-Qaeda operatives in Yemen. But as the drone war escalated, and in the aftermath of the revolution that removed President Ali Abdullah Saleh from power, Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula grew. The Yemeni and U.S. governments say they are cooperating to push Al-Qaeda back.
We are not fighting terrorism for the United States. We are fighting terrorism for the security of Yemen.
Why not just say, you know what, we're not going to help you until the detainees come home?
Because I don't think this is the right approach. I think the right approach is really to sit and look at the risks and dangers and benefits of whatever decision you take. It's not a bargaining table.
We want to find out more about Al-Qaeda in Yemen, so we traveled to meet a man who is said to have preached in Afghanistan in the late 90s, and to have arranged Osama bin Laden's marriage to his fifth bride. Assalamu alaikum. Rashid Ismail has two relatives detained at Guantanamo. His brother Sadek was released back to Yemen in 2007, after 6 years. Rashid says that a few Yemenis have joined up with Al-Qaeda after returning from Guantanamo, but he blames poverty, rampant unemployment, and American counter-terrorism policy.
أمريكا تلاحقهم واستهدفتهم بالطائرات بدون طيار واعتدت على السيادة الوطنية وعلى الكرامة الإنسانية اليمنية وقتلت وشردت وأسرت وأحرقت الأرض. هذا خلق عداء أكثر لأمريكا وكراهية أكثر لأمريكا.
What is your current relationship with Al-Qaeda in Yemen?
علاقة أنهم مسلمون ونحن مسلمون، علاقة أنهم ضمن النسيج الاجتماعي الوطني. نقول لهم أن يستغلوا فرص التهدئة، يقللوا من نسبة الحرب والاحتراب داخل اليمني. هم يردوا علينا يقولوا من يؤمننا فنعيش؟ من يخرج معتقلين من السجون؟ من يؤمننا من الطائرات الأمريكية؟ من ومن ومن؟ فنحن ننصح الجميع أن يضعوا السلاح ويجلسوا على مائدة الحوار. نقول لأمريكا تضع السلاح وتجلس على مائدة الحوار.
In Washington, there's no hint that talks with Al-Qaeda are on the table. But in May, as he laid out the next steps in America's war, the president announced his intention to renew efforts to close Guantanamo and lifted the moratorium on returning detainees to Yemen.
And given my administration's relentless pursuit of Al-Qaeda's leadership, there is no justification beyond politics for Congress to prevent us from closing a facility that should have never been opened.
President Obama has the legal authority to transfer many detainees out of Guantanamo, but his critics say he has so far lacked the political will to do so.
I'll be at first to acknowledge that the administration could be doing more to close Guantanamo.
But Congress has enacted laws that prevent the administration from using U.S. funds to transfer detainees to the United States to be tried or imprisoned.
There are no human rights violations occurring at Guantanamo
House
Bay.
Republicans are trying to reimpose the ban on transfers back to
That
Yemen.
meet or surpass the standard.
And at the first congressional hearing on Guantanamo in 4 years, closing it seems more controversial than ever.
I have a hard time seeing how it is responsible to shut down our detention facilities and send these individuals home where they almost surely would be released and almost surely would return to threaten and kill more Americans.
Excuse me, Representative Pompeo?
Republican Congressman Mike Pompeo sits on the House Intelligence Committee.
You support the right to a fair trial?
Well, I support the absolute right for those military tribunals to continue to move forward down at Guantanamo
There are
Bay.
indefinite detainees, meaning people who are not cleared for transfer, and yet there's not sufficient evidence to carry them to a military tribunal. So doesn't that violate the right to a fair trial?
We are still at war, and we have captured enemy combatants, and we have the absolute authority under the laws of war. I'm a veteran myself. When the war is over, I will always act in compliance with every single law of war. America always has, and we always will.
And so the indefinite detention in the meantime is okay?
It's not indefinite, sir. It's continuing while the war is going on.
Rumsfeld knew damn well he'd be out of office and wouldn't have to answer that question. What do we do with them? Do we leave them there forever? As an American citizen who is not a coward, I'd be willing to release every one of them tomorrow morning and face them on the battlefield again if necessary. But we got a lot of cowards in this country these days.
Yeah, go inside.
In Yemen, the news that Obama had lifted the moratorium had raised hopes high. Hail al-Mithal told his family that when he returned from Guantanamo after more than a decade, he wanted to get married.
إنه في اليمن الحمد لله يعني العادة هو الأم أو الأخت هي اللي تختار عدة زوجات بما يتناسب مع أشياء معينة يعني عادات وتقاليد معينة يمنية.
His brothers went so far as to plan the role Hail would take on in the advertising shop they run as a family business, to help him reintegrate into society. Then they learned that Hail was on the list of 46 indefinite detainees, 26 of them from Yemen.
كانت الصاعقة علينا يعني تعادل نفس الصاعقة الخبر عندما أخبرنا بأنه اعتقل في غوانتنامو وكأنه اعتقل في هذه اللحظة مرة أخرى.
هاي ما كان شيء هذه. هذه الملابس هاي من حنخرج وأنا محتفظة بهن وأصير عينهن وأبزهن هان وأحببهن هان. هذا ولدي. هذا أقلامه عندي في الدنيا.
They want to know why, if the U.S. is convinced Heil is a dangerous enemy combatant and an al-Qaeda operative, he won't be tried.
يحاكموه ولا يطلعوا مدين يقصوا يقتلوه يفتنوه به نحن لو قد راح أفتهم لكن بهذه الطريقة حي ميت ويدعوا بالديمقراطية يدرسوا لنا الديمقراطية وهم فلتين لها.
Across town, the banner of another indefinite detainee hangs outside the Al-Hilla home.
Abdul Salam's family has put up posters calling for his release, this one asking, when will the sun of freedom rise? It speaks to a few things. One, obviously, to the power that the family has in this area, but it also shows how there is no stigma attached to being the family member of a Guantanamo detainee. And if you see the posters in the vehicles, the storefronts hanging from the banners, it suggests that there is a ton of public support, at least in this area, for having those Guantanamo detainees returned home.
Nabil Al-Hilla represents detainee families on a ministerial committee set up by the government, the same government he blames for what's befallen his brother.
أي شيء بتقدمه الحكومة الأمريكية بياخذوه وبيتسابقوا عليه. لهذا أجواءنا مباحة، معتقلنا ما بش لهم قيمة. يعني إحنا شعب يعني في الواقع إحنا شعب يحكم نفسه بنفسه، فقط هؤلاء بس عبارة عن دماء.
In his last Skype call with his family, arranged through the International Red Cross, Abdul Salam told his brothers about the hunger strike that started last February. At its peak, more than 100 detainees were participating.
هذا اللي احنا فيه الآن شيء ما كان حد في الحسبان، ولو كان من أول نقول له يا فلان يومين 3 أيام يقول لك يا أخي يكفيني أنا فيني أمراض وفيني اللي يكفيني خلي لي حالي. الآن الناس بالإجماع الناس منتظرين فرج الله عز وجل للخروج من السجن.
يعني قال لنا أنهم الآن يتعرضون لإدخال الأنابيب بعد أن يتم ربطهم إلى الكراسي وأخذهم إلى المستشفى.
Heil has gone on hunger strike too and is also being tube-fed.
نخيل هذا عندنا في الجزيرة العربية معناتها الحياة والأمل في الحياة، أي معنى ذلك أنهم ليس بإضرابهم عن الطعام أنهم يريدون الموت، لكن إضرابهم عن الطعام هي آخر محاولة للضغط على الحكومة الأمريكية من أجل أن تنظر إليهم لأنهم أصبحوا من المنسيين.
The hunger strike has drawn international attention and prompted Obama's renewed pledge to close Guantanamo and the lifting of the moratorium on transfers to Yemen. In July, the Department of Defense said it was going to begin holding hearings for 71 men, including those on the list of indefinite detainees, to determine whether their captivity is still warranted. Since their release, Mohammed and Farouk have done their best to move on.
طبيعي جدا. لو جلست كرهية بنسيب ما بعيش. والله فذاك أعيش مستقر ما بشي أي حاجة، يعني كأن لم يحصل شيء، أمر انتهى.
So since you've been released, has Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula ever tried to recruit you?
أبداً ما حصل حاجة من هذا الشيء. ما احتكش يعني مع أي أحد، بس البيت والمسجد والشغل والبيت فقط، ما عنديش أي حاجة ثانية.
They have found scarce jobs at a honey shop in Taiz. Farouk is studying to be a lawyer. Both have married and are expecting their first children soon. The government of the United States hasn't apologized or compensated them for the years they spent imprisoned. Nearly 7 months after the hunger strike began, some 35 men continued to refuse food at Guantanamo Bay. In Washington, the White House declined to speak with fault lines for this report. In Yemen, families are still waiting for signs that their loved ones are coming home.